We didn't order for your son, my sister said, handing him a bread basket while her kids ate $100 steaks and dessert. My father followed it up without missing a beat. You should have brought him something from home. I smiled politely and replied, noted, when the waiter returned. I stood and announced that I had spent the majority of my adult life cleaning up after my sister's disasters, financial ones, emotional ones. Entire weeks of unpaid childcare while she vanished on sudden emergency trips. I did it quietly, rarely thanked, always hearing the same excuse from our parents. She's going through a lot, as if I weren't. Jill's life had always been a rotating catastrophe, one dramatic implosion after another, yet somehow she always landed softly, cushioned by someone else stepping in to absorb the impact. Most often that someone was me, or our parents. They treated her like delicate glass, incapable of responsibility, exempt from consequences. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The Grand View Yacht Club sits right at the edge of the harbor, the kind of place where membership fees rival the price of a used car and sunsets feel like a premium upgrade. The air carries salt, seawater, and expensive perfume, a heavy blend that always tightens my chest. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. My father, Christopher, was finally retiring after 40 years in corporate law, a career he wore like armor. My mother, Patricia, had spent 6 months orchestrating this dinner, micromanaging everything from the floral arrangements to the seating chart. That chart was the first clue that this night wasn't really about honoring my father, it was about ranking. The main table seated 6, my parents at the center, of course. My sister Brittany and her newest boyfriend on one side, my uncle William and his wife on the other. And then several feet away, tucked near the service hallway and swinging kitchen doors, there was a small round table for 2. Me and my 6-year-old son, Jacob. I tried to dismiss the sting. I told myself the main table was simply full, logistics, nothing personal, but then the food began to arrive. At the main table, indulgence paraded by. Towering seafood displays packed with ice and glistening oysters. Bottles of vintage wine worth more than my monthly grocery bill. Waiters glided like precision instruments, laying down filet mignon and lobster tails. Brittany, who calls herself a lifestyle influencer, but mostly influences my checking account into overdraft, was already photographing the spread, angling her phone to capture curated abundance. At our table, nothing. Jacob sat quietly, hands folded in his lap, watching the spectacle unfold just feet away. He wore his favorite blue button-down, the one he loved because it made him feel grown up. He didn't complain when we were seated away from everyone else. He didn't complain when appetizers passed us by, but when the entrees landed at the main table and our place remained empty, he looked up at me, confusion clouding his eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "is our food coming? I'm really hungry." I flagged down a waiter, forcing a pleasant smile. "Excuse me, I think we were missed." "Could we see a menu?" The waiter stiffened, glancing nervously toward my father. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was told the tasting menu was only for the main table." "Your father said you weren't included in the head count for dinner service." My stomach dropped. I looked over. My father was cutting into his steak, deliberately avoiding my gaze. My mother laughed at something Brittany said, her wine glass catching the last light of the evening. I walked over. "Dad," I said quietly, "Jacob is hungry." "Why weren't we included?" He didn't pause his meal. He chewed, swallowed, and finally looked up at me with flat, distant eyes. "It's a fixed-price menu, Emily, 500 a head." We didn't think it made sense to spend that on a 6-year-old who won't appreciate truffle oil. Besides, things are tight with the retirement transition. Tight. From a man wearing a $15,000 watch, from a table eating gold-flecked desserts in a private yacht club, Brittany chimed in, mouth full of lobster. "Just give him some bread." "He loves bread." She grabbed the complimentary basket and shoved it toward me. "There. Easy fix." Under the table, I saw her slip a piece of prime steak to her Pomeranian, Coco, nestled in a designer carrier. The dog ate better than my child. I stood there holding a basket of cold rolls, and something inside me finally broke. Not loudly, no tears, no shouting, just the quiet, irreversible sound of a foundation cracking. I looked at Jacob, his eyes hopeful, trusting me to make this right. Then I looked at my family, a sister feeding a dog better than her nephew. Parents who viewed my child not as family but as an unnecessary cost. For years, I had swallowed moments like this. I told myself patience would earn love. That generosity would eventually be returned, that if I stayed small enough, agreeable enough, we'd be welcomed the way Brittany always was. The brain is remarkably protective. It normalizes dysfunction until it feels ordinary. When you grow up in emotional cold, you don't recognize it as abnormal. You assume numb fingers and chattering teeth are just how life feels. You learn to shrink yourself, to bundle inward, to reduce surface area so the cold can't hurt as much. I spent 29 years doing that, apologizing for existing. Convincing myself cruelty was just another form of affection. That love was something you had to earn through endurance. But watching Jacob clutch a bread roll like a consolation prize for being born changed the temperature instantly. I stepped out of the freezer. For the first time, I felt heat, not anger. Anger is chaotic. This was rage, quiet, focused, absolute. I smiled at my sister. I smiled at my father. Noted, I said, and I returned to my table. I sat across from Jacob and pushed the bread basket aside. He looked worried. Mom, are you okay? I took his hand. I'm better than okay, baby. I'm awake, I signaled the waiter again, this time without politeness. When he approached, visibly tense, I spoke clearly, loudly enough to carry over the hum of conversation and clinking silverware. I'd like to place an order. He glanced toward my father. I snapped my fingers. Eyes on me, please. We're ordering a la carte and it's going on the member account. My father spun around. Emily, what do you think you're doing? I ignored him. For my son, Wagyu ribeye medium rare, 14 ounces. Add the lobster tail, truffle mac and cheese on the side. For dessert, the chocolate souffle, the large one. The waiter froze. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls theatrically. Emily, that's a $200 steak. He's 6, I turned to her calmly. I know, Mom. Since things are tight, I thought I'd help. I'm canceling the rest of your courses. I faced the waiter again. Cancel the vintage Cabernet for the toast. Cancel the seafood tower refill. Cancel dessert for the main table. Actually cancel anything that hasn't left the kitchen yet. My father stood, face darkening. You can't do that. That's my account. Actually, I said evenly, meeting his eyes, it's a family account. You added me as an authorized user 3 years ago when you needed me running errands because you were too busy being important. You never removed me. Silence spread across the terrace. Nearby tables stopped talking. Brittany looked ill. Uncle William hid a smile behind his water glass. The waiter studied me, then nodded. Right away, ma'am. I sat back and unfolded my napkin. Jacob stared at me wide-eyed. Mom, is Grandpa mad? I smiled, really smiled. It doesn't matter, sweetheart. Tonight we feast. And as the waiter brought out the sizzling steak, placing it in front of my son with a flourish usually reserved for royalty, Il watched my family. They sat in stunned silence, their own plates suddenly looking less appetizing. They were realizing that the dynamic had shifted. The ATM was out of order. The doormat had grown spikes, and the bill was finally coming due. The aftermath of the dinner was exactly what you'd expect from people who value appearance over substance. The drive home was quiet, but my phone was not. It vibrated against the console of my car like a trapped insect buzzing with incoming notifications. I didn't look at it. I focused on the road, on the rhythm of the street lights, passing overhead, on the soft breathing of Jacob asleep in the back seat. His belly was full of Wagyu beef and chocolate, and he was dreaming the peaceful dreams of a child who knows he is safe. I wished I could say the same for myself. When I finally pulled into my driveway and carried Jacob to bed, I sat down at my kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of tap water. The silence of my house usually felt lonely. Tonight, it felt heavy, pregnant with the realization of what I had just done. I had publicly humiliated my father. I had stolen control from my mother. I had openly defied the family hierarchy. In their world, these were capital offenses. I unlocked my phone. The first text was from Brittany. You are psychotic. You ruined Dad's night. Everyone is talking about how crazy you acted. Send me $500 for the cancellation fees, or I'm telling everyone you had a mental breakdown. The second was from my mother. I don't know who you think you are, but you are not the daughter I raised. You embarrassed us in front of the entire club. Fix this now. The third was from my father, a simple notification from the bank, access revoked. He had removed me from the family account before the dessert plates were even cleared. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound in the empty kitchen. They thought this was about money. They thought they could punish me by cutting off access to an account I never used for myself anyway. They didn't understand. I wasn't trying to spend their money. I was trying to show them that I was done spending mine. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet. I titled it the ransom. For years, I had been the safety net, the backup plan, the silent investor in the business of Brittany's life. My parents constantly told me that family helps family. What they meant was that I helped Brittany. Brittany needed a new car because her image as an influencer depended on it. I co-signed the loan. Brittany maxed out her credit cards on a business trip to Chelum. I transferred the balance to my card to save her credit score. Brittany couldn't make rent because her brand deals fell through. I wrote the check. I started typing. Every transaction, every transfer, every loan that was never repaid. November 2021, rent assistance $1,200. January 2022, car repair $850. March 2022, emergency credit card payoff $4,500. July 2022, bailout for the failed jewelry line launch $3,000. The list went on and on. I pulled up my bank statements, cross-referencing dates and amounts. The total at the bottom of the column grew larger and larger until it stared back at me, a five-figure indictment of my own stupidity. $18,500. $18,500. That was a down payment on a house. That was a college fund for Jacob. That was a year of freedom. And I had given it away piece by piece, buying a seat at a table where I wasn't even allowed to eat. I realized then what it was. It wasn't charity. It wasn't generosity. It was a ransom. I had been paying a ransom for a hostage my family's love that was never alive to begin with. I thought if I paid enough, if I saved them enough times, if I was useful enough, they would finally look at me and see a daughter. They would see a sister, but you can't buy what isn't for sale. And you can't save people who don't want to be saved. You can only drown with them. I looked at the total again. $18,500. That money was gone. I knew I would probably never see it again. But I could stop the bleeding. I could stop paying the ransom. I opened my email and composed a new message. Subject: financial independence to Brittany. Mom, Dad, CC, Uncle William. Effective immediately. I am ceasing all financial support for Brittany. The car loan I co-signed will need to be refinanced in her name within 30 days, or I will contact the lender to discuss options for removal, including voluntary repossession if payments are missed. The credit card balance transfer is due in full. I am no longer the family's safety net. If Brittany wants to live an expensive life, she can pay for it herself. Do not contact me asking for money again. I attached the spreadsheet. I attached the bank statements. I hit send. It felt like cutting a wire on a bomb. There was a moment of breathless silence and then the explosion. My phone lit up instantly. Brittany calling, Mom calling, Dad calling. I didn't answer a single one. I turned my phone off. I walked into Jacob's room and watched him sleep for a minute, his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of peace. I had spent my whole life trying to be the good girl, the reliable one, the one who fixed things. But tonight, I realized that you can't fix a house that's built on a sinkhole. You can only get your furniture out before it swallows you whole. I went back to my room, lay down in the dark, and for the first time in years, I didn't worry about what my family thought of me. I was done paying. The ransom was over. The following days were a masterclass in chaos. My family, clearly unused to facing consequences, spiraled spectacularly. Brittany took to Instagram Live crying about how I had abandoned her during a mental health crisis, conveniently omitting the part where she starved my son. My mother left voicemails that ranged from weeping pleas to cold threats about disinheritance. My father sent legal-sounding emails demanding I pay for the emotional damages caused by my public outburst. I didn't engage. I didn't argue. I forwarded everything to Uncle William. Uncle William wasn't just my uncle. He was a retired judge with a reputation for being fair but ruthless. He had always been the black sheep of my father's side because he refused to play the social climbing game. When I called him the day after the dinner, he listened in silence. When I sent him the spreadsheet and the emails, he called me back within 10 minutes. Emily, he said, his voice grave, this isn't just bad parenting. This is financial abuse and possibly fraud. We met at his home office, a quiet room filled with books and the smell of old paper. He reviewed my documents with a magnifying glass, quite literally. You co-signed the car loan. He asked, peering over his spectacles. Yes, Dad said it would help her build credit and the credit card balance transfer. Mom said it was a one-time emergency. Brittany's purse was stolen in Chelum. Uncle William snorted. Her purse wasn't stolen. I saw the photos. She bought a new one. He helped me draft the formal demand letters. We used legal letterhead. The language was precise, devoid of emotion, and terrifyingly clear. We demanded repayment of the $18,500, giving them 30 days before we filed a civil suit. We notified them that I was removing myself as a cosigner on the car loan, which would trigger an immediate recall of the debt unless they refinanced. We sent copies to their family attorney, a man who I suspected was just as tired of their antics as I was. But the real work, the work that kept me up at night, was the audit. I needed to separate my life from theirs completely. I went through every account, every subscription, every shared password. I changed everything. I requested my credit reports. I froze my credit. I was building a fortress around myself and Jacob. It was during this excavation that I found the key. I was going through a box of old papers my father had stored in my garage years ago for safekeeping. He had always used my house as an overflow storage unit for his hoarding tendencies. Most of it was junk, old tax returns, expired warranties. But at the bottom of a box labeled 2005 to 2010 household, I found a black ledger. It looked like a standard accounting book. I opened it expecting to find business expenses. Instead, I found my name. Emily Braces, $4,500. Emily Piano Lessons, $1,200. Emily Prom Dress, $300. Emily College Tuition, Semester 1, $12,000. Every expense, every single dollar spent on me since childhood was listed under a column titled Debt Divided by To Be Repaid. I flipped the pages, my hands shaking. It went back years. Emily Medical Deductible for Broken Arm, $500. Emily School Field Trip, $40. I turned to the section labeled Brittany. Brittany Dance Academy Investment. Brittany Modeling Portfolio Gift. Brittany Car Gift. Brittany Europe Trip Cultural Enrichment. There was no debt column for Brittany. There was only investment and gift. I sat on the cold concrete floor of my garage, the ledger heavy in my lap. It wasn't just that they favored her. It was that they had monetized my existence. They had viewed me as a financial liability from the moment I was born, a debt to be collected, while Brittany was an asset to be nurtured. The transactionality of their love wasn't a feeling I had. It was a policy they had written down in ink. I took photos of every page, then I took the ledger to Uncle William. When he saw it, he didn't say a word. He just closed the book, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Christopher always was a bean counter, he said softly. But this is pathological. Can I use it? I asked. Oh yes, he said, a dark glint in his eye. We can use it, but not in court. In court, this is just sad. In the court of public opinion, in the court of family reputation, this is a nuclear bomb. We didn't have to wait long to use it. 3 days later, my parents showed up at my door. It was a Saturday morning. Jacob was watching cartoons. I saw their car pull up my father's pristine Mercedes, and I felt a surge of old panic. But then I remembered the ledger. I remembered the ransom spreadsheet. I remembered the stake. I opened the door but blocked the entrance. What do you want? My mother looked frazzled. Her hair wasn't perfectly coiffed. My father looked angry, but underneath the anger I saw fear. We need to talk, Emily. My father said, this legal nonsense has to stop. You're tearing this family apart. I'm just balancing the books, Dad. I said, isn't that what you taught me? Financial responsibility. We need you to sign a document, my mother said, cutting to the chase. The bank needs a co-signature for the refinancing on the house, where we're doing some restructuring. Restructuring, that was code for we're broke. They needed my credit score. They needed my income verification. They needed the ATM to spit out one last receipt. No, I said, Emily, be reasonable, my father snapped. It's just a signature. It doesn't cost you anything. It costs me my future, I said, and I'm done paying for yours. I reached behind me to the entry table where I had left a photocopy of the ledger. I held it out to them. What is this? My mother asked, taking it. She looked at the page. I saw the recognition in her eyes. I saw the moment she realized what I had found. My father looked over her shoulder and went pale. I found your accounting, Dad, I said, very thorough. I see you charged me interest on my braces. That's impressive. That was just for record keeping. He stammered. I never intended to collect. I interrupted. You've been collecting for 29 years. You've been collecting my time, my energy, my money, my self-worth. You've been bleeding me dry to water Brittany's garden. Well, the debt is settled. I pointed to the driveway. I sent copies to Uncle William and Aunt Sarah and the cousins. Everyone knows the ledger is public record now. You wouldn't, my mother whispered. I already did, I said. Get off my property and don't come back until you have a check for $18,500. They stared at me. For the first time in my life, I saw them not as giants, not as authority figures, but as small, sad people who had built their lives on a foundation of lies. They turned and walked back to their car. They looked old, they looked defeated. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and listened to the sound of their engine fading away. Jacob wandered into the hallway holding his favorite stuffed tiger. Moms, who was that? I turned and scooped him up, hugging him tight. Nobody, baby. Just some people who used to know us. Are they coming back? No, I said. They're not. The fallout was quiet but absolute. The family grapevine did its work. The ledger was the final nail. Relatives who had been on the fence, who had urged me to make peace, saw the black and white proof of my parents' cruelty and fell silent. My parents were isolated. Brittany, without her funding source, had to sell her car and move into a smaller apartment. She blocked me on social media, which was the greatest gift she could have given me. I got my money back. Not all of it, but enough. Uncle William helped me negotiate a settlement where they paid me a lump sum to avoid a lawsuit. It wasn't the full $18,500, but it was $12,000. I took that check and I didn't spend it. I didn't buy a new car. I didn't go on a trip. I opened an investment account in Jacob's name. I called it the Freedom Fund. Every month, the money that used to go to Brittany, the loans, the bailouts, the guilt payments I put into that account, I watched the number grow. It wasn't just money, it was a promise. A promise that my son would never have to buy his way into his own family. A promise that he would never have to pay a ransom for love. I sat on my back porch one evening watching Jacob play in the yard. He was chasing fireflies, his laughter ringing out in the twilight. The air was cool and sweet. I thought about revenge. People always say revenge is a dish best served cold, but they're wrong. Revenge isn't about serving anything to anyone. It's about refusing to eat the poison they served you. It's about building your own table. I looked at my son running free in the grass and I knew I had won, not because they were miserable, but because we were happy. I sipped my tea. I listened to the silence where their demands used to be, and for the first time in 29 years, I wasn't shivering. The ransom was paid, the hostage was free. And the future was entirely ours. If you've ever had to buy your own peace of mind, share this story. You never know who needs to hear that walking away is an option.